While there are a ton of great fighting game artists out there, Bengus, Shinkiro, Kuano and Ishiwatari stand out as the ones who shaped some of the most iconic titles ever made. From Bengus' explosive Street Fighter and Darkstalkers work to Shinkiro's grounded realism in King of Fighters. From Kawano's influence on Tekken and SoulCalibur to Ishiwatari's anime-driven style that defined Guilty Gear. In case of Capcom, an interviewer wanted to know Bengus, his motivation for applying. I don't remember why I chose to apply to Capcom, but I'd seen a lot of their developer illustrations in a magazine, and I always thought they were quite good. When we break down and analyze Bengus' illustrations, one thing becomes obvious fast. He doesn't operate with one fixed art style. He shifts, constantly. Over the years he moved from traditional tools to digital techniques, evolving toward modern anime aesthetics. At the same time, the overall art direction for each Capcom project shaped how far he could experiment. Since the 90s, Capcom has used an internal art guide that lays out rules for visual clarity. Exaggerated hands and limbs, strong silhouettes, readable poses, and personality restrictions for certain characters. Others, like Zangief, or Bengus' favorite, Sakura, had more freedom, focusing purely on Bengus himself. At first glance, he doesn't seem to have that one signature look other artists are known for. As he said, "If I don't quite grasp something, I won't hesitate to look it up, but I tend not to look at reference images while I draw." He absolutely set the tone for Capcom's fighting games, even though the company rarely reveals who shaped what. For example, he started the Alpha series together with Ikano and Daichan, and Edion joined in Alpha 2. Still, his Alpha work feels on another level. Energetic, shonen, iconic. The series had to stand out, and style really was the keyword. Those sprites were reused in tons of spin-offs, and Bengus was consistently asked to create promotional art because his drawings translated so well to the in-game sprites. So what actually reoccurs in his work? Technically, not much. He switches too often to build one unified rule set. But some tendencies show up. Eyes drawn in a square-like shape with open corners, clear distinctions between protagonists and antagonists, and occasionally pure white eyes for intensity or authority. His noses are usually well defined, and in his more recent work, the jawlines are stronger. If that all sounds vague, here's the actual key. His style is more character dependent than technique dependent. Ryu looks like Ryu in any of Bengus' styles. Ken too. Same eyebrows, same structure. Akuma's face is always broad and heavy. Saget's chin and lips are expressive. Zangief remains comedic. The aesthetic might change, but the character identity stays intact. That's what makes his work so effective. Bengus captures personality through body language, gesture and silhouette. This is why he did so many story endings and character panels. He understood the character dynamics. Ryu and Ken are the clearest example. Rivals but friends, similar but different, and he reinforces that contrast in every iteration. In terms of anatomy, his proportions are standard fighting game exaggeration, sometimes with an extra steroid boost. His clean concept art leans toward round curves and polished lines, while his rough sketches are loose and full of gesture. And honestly, those sketches are great. They show exactly where his focus lies. The energy of a pose, not the perfection of a line. During interviews, he and other Capcom artists admitted it's hard to keep every character fresh because there are simply so many. And Bengus himself has always been shy. He finds interviews nerve-wracking, but he shared a few interesting things. Up until junior high school, copying anime and manga pictures was practically all I did. But once I hit high school, I didn't really draw much at all. He mainly copied Matsumoto and Toriyama early on, and mentioned liking Gonagai and Sakura Momoko. A teammate once said, he wasn't even familiar with paints, let alone Liquitex. It might be better to come in without prior knowledge. As for tools, he didn't reveal much. Copics, Liquitex, acrylic gouache, and eventually a strong preference for digital. He seems to absorb styles like a sponge. Whatever detail he finds interesting, he experiments with it. He even admitted he's a perfectionist and regrets not revising certain expressions. Many of his group compositions look like movie posters. Yet when he was asked what part of the job is toughest, he said, "Nothing in particular, but actually drawing the pictures is the most enjoyable part for me." And it says a lot. When we expand further, SNK had its own giant, Shinkiro. His polished realism became the face of King of Fighters, and later even crossed into Capcom's world. While he worked on Street Fighter, he said, "I was told to take the illustrations in a different direction, so I incorporated the flat look before my time with SNK. They kept telling me to go into a different direction more and more. So I had a lot of trouble getting things approved. Thus, I used the old marker and introduced it into the digital world." When we break down and analyze Shinkiro's work, the first thing that jumps out is his precision. He leans into realistic anatomy and defined facial features, yet he always keeps a slight touch of stylization. His characters feel like they breathe, with focused expressions and those sharp, piercing eyes that have become a signature. They are carefully shaded, and with the strong whites, they immediately pull your attention. He mentioned once that he puts extra emphasis on the eyes to make them the focal point. Features like the nose and mouth softened under his coloring style, blending naturally into the face and giving that subtle three-dimensional depth. It's part of why people joke about the Shinkiro face syndrome, shared facial structures across characters. Like it or not, it makes his work unmistakable. He's designed plenty of iconic characters, and he loves Chun-Li's design by Akira Yasuda. Still, he's surprisingly self-critical when it comes to drawing women. "I suck at drawing females to begin with. Ingrid is such a classically beautiful character, she is exactly the kind of character I suck at drawing. I went on the internet and looked at some pretty girls in maid outfits to use as a reference. Honestly, he's underselling himself." Across characters, he nails expression. The intensity in the face, the energy, he gets it right every time. In group illustrations, you can almost feel him enjoying the process. He once joked that he uses a mirror to check his own expressions when he needs reference. For traditional pieces, he uses acrylic gouache. For Capcom work, he switched to digital markers. His approach to color feels almost like traditional painting. Deep tones, deliberate shading and lighting that always sets the mood. Sometimes the palette reflects the character's inner state. Cool tones for calm, saturated reds for intensity. He often adds thin outlines too, which gives the work a clean finish. Capcom's visual rules are strict, especially for Street Fighter, and he had to adapt. Over time, he picked up the team's cues, adding more muscle and exaggeration to match the established look. And he didn't hide the struggle. Early pieces were rejected for being too detailed or realistic, pushing him toward the flatter, more cartoony direction. The hybrid he ended up with is unusual, but he made it work. Some pieces lean flat, others more dimensional, and that mix is part of what makes his Capcom era so interesting. For backgrounds, he often uses effects to set tone and make the characters pop. He tries to balance his own ideas with what clients and players expect. And he's mentioned being inspired by artists like Robert McGuinness, Drew Struzan, and Noriyoshi Orai. No surprise that many of his group shots feel like movie posters. Layered, readable, and full of small narrative touches if you look closely. He's always been open about why he draws. I always liked drawing as a child, and when I had to decide what I was going to do with my life, I realized that I had no other practical skills. And his advice to artists sums up his whole career. It is a wonderful thing to be able to do what you love for a living. But after doing the same work for a long time, it becomes easy to forget why you were doing it in the first place. Please, don't forget why you began drawing, or how lucky you are to be able to draw for a living. It fits him, even as he adapted to new tools, new companies, and new expectations. He never lost that core drive. That consistency is what makes his evolution interesting and why his work still stands out. When we shift from SNK into another major pillar of fighting game art, we end up at Namco. And if we talk about Namco's leading 2D artist, we're talking about Takuji Kawano. Kuano was responsible for a lot of the early Tekken 3 artwork, and later made his debut in SoulCalibur 2. The director of SoulCalibur 5 once said, "Kuano is our team's ace. He always comes up with new designs and illustrations. He keeps us in business." Breaking down and analyzing Kuano's style is interesting but tricky on multiple levels, because Namco was one of the first companies to lean hard into CGI, and they rarely credited individual artists. But if we compare Kawano's early work with his later illustrations, we can clearly see the evolution. In his early phase, especially around SoulCalibur and the early Tekken era, his characters had stronger anime influence. Somewhat realistic proportions, but still those stylized eyes and long legs that were popular in 90s Japanese game art. He drew characters in strong fighting stances or mid-motion poses. As time moved on, and for example Tekken shifted towards more realistic graphics, Kawano's style changed with it. Faces became more grounded, eyes became standard proportion, body shapes got more realistic. But one thing never changed, his sense of dynamism. Kuano tends to make characters feel like they're in motion, even when they're standing still. His female characters used to have exaggerated curves in his older work, watermelon proportions. But his modern pieces lean more to normal-sized curves, even in the fan service illustrations. Whether he's drawing Tekken, SoulCalibur, or a completely different franchise, his characters always carry that same physical energy and visual weight. Another thing worth noticing is that his characters often look slightly away from the viewer, which isn't uncommon in fighting game art. It might help with visual contrast when displayed side by side during development. What stands out to me is how Kawano handled external guest characters. He studied them deeply enough to capture their personality in a single illustration. His Ryu is surprisingly on point, especially considering how many Capcom artists have said Ryu is one of the hardest characters to draw because he's so restricted. Kuano nails the Capcom proportions, while he seamlessly reflects Namco proportions in the same IP. It shows how easily he adapts to different project styles while still reflecting his own. And it's no surprise he worked across various games that is outside direct fighting games such as Ace Combat, where realism stands central. As a character illustrator, he has done a lot of profiling art, the promotional illustrations and the more artistic concept-driven works. The latter might be the best representation of his skill, bringing out the essence of each character. In contrast to Namco, we jump to Arc System Works. Daisuke Ishiwatari, the creator of Guilty Gear, built the entire visual identity of this series by hand, laying the foundation himself and letting his team develop the rest around his vision. I always try to make sure that the eyes look like eyes, but I often make mistakes. Sometimes it looks like the characters are dead inside, even when it's the main character. When we break down and analyze Ishiwatari's anime-inspired art style, it becomes clear that his characters carry an energy that's instantly recognizable. He often draws large, expressive eyes with tension in the irises and eyelids. He also puts effort into making the eyebrows distinct. The nose, mouth and lips follow the same semi-realistic logic. Clear shapes push toward sharp, manga-inspired stylization. This blend continues into the hair. Sometimes large, iconic shapes, sometimes detailed strands, always with volume, floatiness and confident light placement to reinforce personality. His anatomy is intentionally bold. He likes extreme perspectives, pushing the front of the body toward the viewer and loading every limb with tension to create strong, energetic gestures. Many fighting games exaggerate hands, feet and silhouettes for clarity, but Guilty Gear leans more on weapon-driven readability, which shifts the emphasis away from oversized limbs and toward pose, rhythm and design flow. Ishiwatari's early Guilty Gear illustrations also stand out for their light coloring and the meticulous traditional workflow he detailed in an art book. Using Copic markers, colored pencils, watercolor and thin ink pens, he builds each piece through rough sketches, clean line work, careful perspective, color testing, and deliberate texturing to keep the character as the focal point. This method shows just how much patience traditional work demands. Small corrections, consistent emphasis on the eyes, and constant trial and error. He tends to draw characters mid-action, capturing them in the moment. The combination of expressive eyes and dynamic gestures makes the poses feel immediate and convincing. Like many fighting game artists, he aims for strong character differentiation, adding quirks and visual cues to each design. He mentioned that the original 10 Guilty Gear characters were heavily inspired by the manga bastard, which he was obsessed with at the time. Music also plays a huge role in his creative mindset. Beyond the expected rock and metal influences, he said he listens to everything, from the Beatles to Slayer to death metal to Japanese pop, and these sounds often shape the tone of his character themes. Ishiwatari said his creative process is iterative, built on steady adjustments rather than sudden flashes of genius. As he puts it, talking about spontaneous flashes of inspiration, they happen to me sometimes. Usually, it is like slowly straining a soup. When creating another design, I work rambling like that. Maybe this, or maybe that, a piece of this. Should I insert this here? This is my style named Something Will Come Up Anyway. It is really rare when something flashes and I suddenly come up with a ready design. It's a grounded approach, and honestly, it works. Some days the ideas flow, some days they don't. But you keep moving and eventually something rises to the surface. I'm light novel author GP Vils, and I think we can all agree, a great fighting game lives or dies by its cast. Even when characters share archetypes, these artists make them stand out. Cool, memorable, and the kind of fighters you actually want to pick just to beat someone down with.